Are you looking for a portrait lens for your APS-C mirrorless camera? Let's check out this Viltrox AF56 f1.4 lens. Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at this portrait lens from Viltrox. This is a autofocus lens specially designed for APS-C mirrorless cameras, which give you equivalent focal length of 85mm, which is one of the most popular focal length for taking portrait photos. The lens is available for 3 different mounts: the Canon EF-M, Sony E, and also Fuji X. So we are going to have a look at the Fuji X version today, but optically they should be identical. The price is slightly different between which version you choose, but it is around $300, so it is quite an affordable portrait lens that has autofocus support. For a 56mm f1.4 lens, the size of this lens is pretty compact. It is mostly made of metal body, metal lens mount, so it feels very solid. But despite the full metal construction, the lens is not very heavy. It is just under 300 grams. So when I mount it on the Fujifilm X-T3, it feels very nice, and I imagine even if I mount it on a smaller body, it should still feel quite well balanced. The lens has an aperture range, and you can choose the aperture value from f1.4 all the way to the minimum aperture value f16. This is a declicked aperture range, and just like most other Fuji lenses, you can also put it to the A position, and that would allow the camera to adjust the aperture value. There's a micro USB port on the lens mount which allow you to update firmware. Now I do wish it is a USB-C port, but it is okay, and compared to a lot of other third-party manufacturers, which they may give you like a USB port or some other way to update firmware, but they never release any new firmware. Viltrox, they are actually pretty good. I noticed they do release new firmware for their products very regularly. Usually for third-party lenses, the lens hood that comes with the lens, they are either average or terrible. They are usually made of plastic, so it feels very cheap, and also when you mount it onto the lens, it doesn't feel very nice. But I would say the lens hood that comes with this Viltrox lens feels absolutely amazing. It is made of metal, so very solid and also feel very premium. And also when you mount it onto the lens, the click that you feel when you secure the lens hood on the lens just feel absolutely fantastic. So it just feels very good every time when I grab the lens hood and mount it on the lens, and this is something that I usually don't get from other third-party lenses, and even a lot of first-party lenses, they don't have such a nice lens hood design. One thing that Viltrox managed to do while most other newer third-party lens manufacturer that hasn't managed to do is they have autofocus support for their lenses. So for this Viltrox 56mm lens, no matter you choose the Canon EF-M mount or the Sony E mount or this Fuji X mount, you also have the autofocus support. And it is a STM stepping motor, so the autofocus operation is relatively quiet and also relatively quick. It's not the most quiet or the fastest autofocus lens that I've ever used, but I think most people would be very happy with the autofocus performance. Okay, now let's talk about the image sharpness and have a look at the center of the image first. Even at the maximum aperture f1.4, the center sharpness is already excellent. So when I stop down the lens, the center sharpness doesn't actually improve too much. Let's have a look at the corner. At f1.4, if we look at it at 200% zoom, corner is a bit soft. Stop down to f2 would improve the corner sharpness a bit, but I really have to stop down to f4, then the corner sharpness become very good. When shooting at the maximum aperture f1.4, the bokeh balls from this Viltrox lens are run with smooth transition. I also don't really see much cat's eye effect near the corner of the frame as well. Even when stopping down the lens to f4, the bokeh balls still remain very round and it looks very nice. So overall, I think the bokeh from this Viltrox lens is very pleasant looking. Vignetting is really well controlled by this Viltrox lens. Even at the maximum aperture f1.4, I see very minimal amount of vignetting. And once I stop down to f2, vignetting is virtually unnoticeable. Chromatic aberration control is quite average with this lens. While I don't see any super nasty color flinching in my photos, I do quite often see a bit of chromatic aberration in both my real-world photos or like my local test photos. This Viltrox 56mm lens has minimal amount of distortion. Let's have a look at this brick wall sample photo. There is only small amount of barrel distortion, which is probably unnoticeable when you are taking real-world photos. When shooting directly into the sun or a bright light source, very often I see some strong lens flare. It may be not as strong as the Laowa Argus 33mm lens, which I have also reviewed recently on a Fuji body, but it's also not as cinematic looking as the Laowa lens. But at least the contrast remains quite good even when shooting directly into the sun. So yeah, it's definitely not the strongest area of this lens. With the night aperture braid design, when you stop down the lens, you could get some 18-point sun stars in your photos. Starting from f8, sun stars become apparent in the photos, and when stopped down to the minimum aperture f16, sun stars become really quite sharp. For a lens that is primarily designed for portrait rather than landscape, I think the sun stars from this lens is not bad at all. For videographers, I think you will love the declicked aperture ring on the lens, and in terms of focus briefing, it is also reasonably well controlled. While I do see a small amount of focus briefing in a test video shot like this one, it is usually only noticeable when you change the focus distance from very close to very far away. For the price of around $300, this Viltrox lens is a very good choice for people who is looking at buying a portrait lens but don't want to spend a lot of money. I was a bit worried about the autofocus performance because a lot of the newer third-party lens manufacturer, their autofocus implementation is not really that good, but with this Viltrox lens, the autofocus performance is actually very good, and even shooting at f1.4, the autofocus is very usable and not that much difference from the lenses from the first party manufacturer. And as I mentioned before, I really love the lens hood that comes with this Viltrox lens. It's one of the things that a lot of third party manufacturer they don't spend too much effort on, but I'm glad to see Viltrox they did put a lot of effort and they make a fantastic lens hood that comes with this 56mm lens. I guess the biggest downside of this lens would be the lens flare, because quite often when I'm taking portrait photos, I love to have a strong light source behind my subject. That means there would be a very strong light source directly in front of the camera, so there's quite a bit of chance that I would have a bit of lens flare in my photo. So yeah, this is something that I have to be very careful when I'm taking portrait photo with this lens. But then this is pretty much the only downside or the only complaint that I have with this Viltrox lens. What do you guys think about this Viltrox 56mm 1.4 lens? Would you be interested in buying one, or have you already got one? Share with me your thoughts and comments about this lens, and I will chat with you more on the comment section below.